Hi there, this is, I think, the week 4 video where we'll talk about the 3 readings that we have for this week. I'll start with the shortest one. We have a very short reading this week from Peevehouse, and actually it's quite a, it's sort of a descriptive piece. And so when you look at it, what you'll see is that Peevehouse is looking at the some sort of recent correlates of war data that's been released. Correlates of war data, and you can find this online if you go to, well, if you search out correlates of war on Google, you'll get straight there. But it's a data set or several data sets. It's sort of a growing project. Starts off with, as the name suggests, right, being well, and still is, right, being mostly about data that might give a sense of what causes war, right? Perhaps maybe even what causes states to win wars and that sort of thing. But this particular data set that Peevehouse is talking about is about IGOs, international governmental organizations, right? So think of things like the UN or the EU, right? Basically any organization where, and there is a definition in there, but basically any organization with more than 2, with 3 or more states as members, right? And it should be permanent or like fairly permanent, right? Of course, IGOs come and they go. Think of the League of Nations, but you know, it's sort of semi-permanent with a staff, with a secretariat and a headquarters and that sort of thing. Right? So IGOs and so in Peevehouse, all we're doing is really looking at the growth of IGOs over time. Some of the interesting things that we can see there is how many IGOs there are, how IGOs grew, when they grew, what the relationship was between the growth of the number of IGOs and the growth of the number of nation states in the system, in the international system. Other interesting things that we'll learn there is in which regions are there the most IGOs, and also things like which states are members of the most IGOs. Right? So one of the things that you'll see, for example, is China. One of the big things you'll get out of it is that China is becoming a more and more multilateralist, right? In that China is involving itself in more and more of the international governmental organizations that exist in the world. So that's a brief piece. I think there's only a couple of questions on the test about it, on the quiz about it. And it won't take you long just to read and sort of get an idea about the growth of IGOs. But really what we're looking at, and this really sets us up nicely to talk about what we're looking at this semester, this week, which I guess is part of the semester. But we're looking at are states, particularly states in the West, are they pulling back from international organizations? Right, so we're now on to the other 2 readings, really. And what we have in those other 2 readings is, first of all, sort of a general sense of pulling back. And so there's the Trubowitz reading, which is called something like The Retreat of the West. The Retreat of the West. There you go, that's what it's called. Perspectives on politics. Oh, that's the where it is. Okay. So it's the Retreat of the West, and the idea, it's taking a very general look, and what it does, and I think sort of an interesting thing to follow, is it separates sort of nations' policies on cooperating with other nation states. Right, it sort of categorizes these different policies in 4 ways. Yeah, 4 separate groups, and these are sort of, well, they're nice categories to think about, right? And they sort of give us options between like different ways that the Western states might coordinate themselves. Now, the research itself is sort of generalized, right, across all Western states. Western democracies is sort of the unit of analysis, if you like. So we're not looking at particular states necessarily, right? About is the USA being more integrated into the world, or is France? Well, not. It's much more it's a little bit more aggregated than that, right? And the argument that comes out of it is that there's been a movement away from what Terberowitz calls liberal internationalism. And this is one of these four policy types, right? Four sort of policies on international cooperation. So the four are these. Globalization is one of them. And I want you to sort of look at and see in the definitions, what is globalism for Terberowitz, right? Because globalism means all sorts of things to all sorts of different people. But in this particular study, what does it mean to Terberowitz, globalization? What does liberal internationalism mean? And this is the one that he says that was favored by the Western democracies following the Second World War and found its peak in the 70s and 80s. And following at the end of the Cold War, he says, right, states start to move away en masse, start to move away from this liberal internationalism. And so, find out what there's two sort of subdivisions of all of these policies, right? And that's why we get that sort of grid of four, right? Because we've got two things, two elements, right? One is power, and the other one is partnership, right? And so then they're all made up. You've got one that's big on power and big on partnership. You've got one that's low on power, low on partnership. You've got one that's big on one and not on the other, and then one that's big on the other one and not on that one. So that's the general movement of Western democracies is away from liberal internationalism, away from the system that they favored after the Second World War, during the Cold War. But one of the significant things about it, right, is that one of the significant things about the argument is that this new sort of turn towards either nationalism or isolationism, or perhaps globalism. And I want you to read the things. I don't want to tell you which one and what they all. I don't want to give everything away, right? But that turning away from liberal internationalism towards some of the other options there. We might put a date on it again. We might say, well, that happened with the election of Trump, and Trump's mentioned in the quiz, or Brexit, right? Or company in 2016. Or we might say, well, maybe a little bit before then. But actually, this movement away starts earlier than that. And so, again, check the reading. I don't want to give everything away. I just want to sort of get you oriented towards the reading and have you do your own reading there. So that's the Terberowitz one. There is the last one that I'm covering is actually a little bit more specific, right? So that's more of a general sort of world view, sort of a movement away, a general movement away from liberal internationalism towards other things by Western democracies on the whole. What we get in our final reading, right, the one from Verton, is particularly about backlashes against international courts. Right, and so when we talk about international cooperation and partnership, as we do in Trubowitz, we can talk about it in a general sense, like Trubowitz does, but we can also start to say, well, what does that mean specifically? And one of the things that it means specifically is that international courts themselves, right, which there's a lot of them. If you read Verton, you'll see the different courts, arbitration in the World Trade Organization. The European Court of Human Rights, which is not the same as the European Court of Justice. There's African courts too, that are regional courts on that continent. And so in the Americas, of course, where we are. So there's all in Asia. I just said the last one. I think actually you'll find when you read one of the interesting but not central pieces of information you'll get is that none of these backlashes are happening on the Australasian continent, right? So that's why I specifically didn't mention them, I suppose. But have a look. Verton he tries to find all of the cases, and he claims to have found all of the cases where nation states have taken some action against, tried to undermine the authority of international courts. One of the questions that Verton asks, which is interesting, right, is like, and this is maybe the main question that he asks, is why, there's a few options open to states. States, if they get a particular ruling against them, states might just ignore the ruling, right? That's a total possibility. So you might ignore the ruling. You might implement the ruling, right, which is, I suppose, a complete acceptance of the authority of the court. You might kind of go along with the ruling, right? Sort of, there might be some easy bits of the ruling that you can kind of implement very cheaply and sort of just to pay lip service to the court. So you have all these options, but one of the options is none of those things, not implementation, not partial implementation, not full implementation, not just ignoring the ruling. Well, what you can do is you can take on the court itself, take on the authority, and you can do that in two ways. And these are it's these two ways that Verton's really focused on. You can either try and undermine the whole court, or try and perhaps reform the court in such a way that it no longer can function either at all or in the way that it's bothering you, right? That's one way. And then the second, well, and that first way affects the court itself and its relationship with all of the nation states, right? You can reform the court to the point where it's no longer able to fulfill it's the function that it's been fulfilled for any state. Okay, so that's one way. The other way is just to say, well, I'm taking my state out of it, right? And so you'll see some examples of both of those. That for Verton, both of those are backlashes against the court. And so he tries to find all of the backlashes that have existed against all the courts in the world. And so he finds a number of those. He says, I think this is exhaustive, but of course it's, time's moving on, right? And there's all sorts of reasons why it might not be all, but this is what I think, this is how many I think there've been. And so that's something to look at, right? As Western democracies moving away from international partnership, one of the things that's happening is that they are undermining on purpose, right, the role of courts in the international system, the role of international law and that sort of thing. And why are they doing that? Right? Why? Because again, and this is the big point, right? Why are they doing that when they could just ignore the ruling? Right? They could say, okay, there's the ruling. All right, whatever. What are they going to do? They can't make it. Right? They could do that, or they could again do a partial implementation of the ruling and all those sorts of things. So why, instead of doing that and sort of living with the system that we've sort of built, why are they now trying to dismantle that system? And then, of course, the answer goes again. Verton gets into populism as an answer, and so yeah, have a look and see how that sort of comes into play, how populist political parties come into play. Yeah, I think that's a nice introduction for these readings. I hope you enjoyed the readings this week. This is very much an international week, right, where we're looking at nation states. So we're not looking as much, sort of at domestic clauses here. Well, although domestic, our focus though is on the international level. So bear that in mind, please, when you're writing your questions and that for this week. That we're looking really at the international level more than at any particular domestic level. All right, any particular nation state. All right, well, again, good luck with that this week, and I look forward to seeing what you have to say.